Hi guys, today we'll be talking about stakeholder identification. What is stakeholder identification? Why is it important for stakeholders to be identified? How can these stakeholders be managed within the business environment? All these are things that we'll be discussing as far as the session is concerned today. Before we continue, ensure you subscribe to the channel, like the videos, as well as share the link with friends. Thank you. Hi guys, welcome to the session today. We'll be talking about stakeholders identification. Who is a stakeholder? Why is it important for you as a business analyst or even as a business owner to identify stakeholders? How can you analyze stakeholders? What are the various analyses that can be put in place in order to manage stakeholders? All these are things that we'll be discussing as far as today's session is concerned. In order to begin with, a stakeholder, as we can see on the screen, is anyone who can affect a project or can be affected by the outcome of a project. A stakeholder is anyone who can affect a project or can be affected by the outcome of a project. Let's take, for example, the government decides to fix a part of the road on your street. You will discover that due to this road that is being fixed, in one way or another, because you live on that particular street, you will be affected by the outcome of that project. The government who has made resource available in order to ensure that that road is fixed can also be seen as a stakeholder. The contractor who is responsible for ensuring that the road is done in respect to the government directive can also be seen as a stakeholder. So a stakeholder in this context is anyone that can affect a project outcome or be affected by a project. Now, talking about a stakeholder, this can be found in any business or even in an organization. A stakeholder can be categorized into two. We have got the internal stakeholders and we have got the external stakeholder. Who is an internal stakeholder? An internal stakeholder, to a large extent, is anyone who maintains a direct connection with a business or a project. Now, this internal stakeholder, as the word internal simply means, can be found within the organization. This internal stakeholder is present in the organization. Example of internal stakeholders can be business owners, who, of course, can be categorized as an internal stakeholder. A project team, take for example, the organization decide to embark on a project and as such has decided to put together a team in order to ensure that this project is implemented. The team that has been put together can be seen as an internal stakeholder because they can be found within the organization and they are working in respect to the organization directives. The client of the organization is also an internal stakeholder. Employees, those who are employed within the organization, can also be categorized as an internal stakeholder. Of course, those who sit at the managerial seats, the executives of the organization, are also categorized as the internal stakeholder. This internal stakeholder can be seen within the organization. Don't forget, I gave the definition of stakeholder as anyone who can affect a project or can be affected by the outcome of a project. If anyone sits within this category, two things can affect a project or can be affected by the outcome of a project. This person or this individual can be identified as a stakeholder. Talking about the external stakeholder. An external stakeholder are those who are outside of an organization, and have interest in the organization activities or the outcome of the project. Let's take, for example, outside of the organization, but the outcome of the project will definitely affect this category of people. They are categorized as an external stakeholder. They can be influenced or affected by the decision of the organization in respect to a project that is being carried out. Example of external stakeholders could be suppliers can be categorized as an external stakeholder. Government can be categorized as an external stakeholder. competitors as well as customers of the organization are all categorized as an external stakeholder. I'm sure you still remember what we call the definition, or what I've been able to define as what a stakeholder is. Anyone who can affect a project or can be affected by the outcome of a project is categorized as a stakeholder. Having said that, having the understanding that a stakeholder could either be internal or external, how then can we identify stakeholders, or how can these stakeholders be analyzed? The questions would be, why is there a need to analyze a stakeholder? You will agree with me, either it is internal or external stakeholder. Stakeholder can fall, like I said, in any of the category, which could be internal or external, and as such, there is a reason, or there is, to a large extent, there is an importance to manage the stakeholders. Now, when we talk about managing stakeholder, before you can manage a stakeholder, it is important for you to identify a stakeholder. If you have been able to identify that this is a stakeholder, then you can manage successfully the stakeholder, irrespective of the stakeholder being internal or external. Having said that, the stakeholder could be anyone that can affect a project or could be affected by the outcome of a project. Two elements are very important in that definition. How can I affect a project? That's the question that I'm putting to you. Or how can a project affect me? Two things could be derived from that. I can affect a project in respect to the power that I have, in respect to the organization. I can be affected by a project, on the other hand, in respect to my interest on the project. So talking about analyzing stakeholder, after the stakeholder has been identified, it is important that we analyze the stakeholder in respect to these two elements that was being derived from the definition, which is the power and the interest of a stakeholder. So the questions could be, what is the power of the stakeholder? What is the interest of this stakeholder? Having the understanding of this question can then lead us to the next part, which is analyzing the stakeholder. Don't forget that in order for you to identify a stakeholder, you want to ensure that you know that this stakeholder is either internal or external. And in order for you to identify a stakeholder, you can also leverage on document analysis. These are documents that could be found within the organization, or even by mere elicitation, asking questions in respect to the project you found yourself. So who are the stakeholders in respect to this project? Who are those that could affect this project, or who are those that could be affected by the project? Asking this simple question could help you identify a stakeholder. And that takes us to the next part, which I explained earlier, or started explaining, which is stakeholder analysis. So in analyzing a stakeholder, I said two elements are very important: the interest of the stakeholder as well as the power of the stakeholder. I've been able to put a 3-column on the screen in order to help you with your analysis. Some school of thought call it stakeholder metrics. So the question is, what is the name of the stakeholder? What is the role of this stakeholder? And then you can answer these two questions: the interest of the stakeholder as well as the power of the stakeholder. Now, the interest and power of the stakeholder, for simplicity's sake, can either be high or low. So the question is, this particular stakeholder in question, what is their interest? Is it high interest or is it a low interest? What is the power of this stakeholder within the organization? Does this stakeholder hold a high power or a low power within the organization? Answering this question will take us to the next point, which will give us these 4 elements that we can find on the screen. So a stakeholder will either fall in any of these 4 categories. And what are these categories? Number 1 category is a stakeholder will either fall in the category of a low interest and a high power category. This is based on the analysis that is done. Now, a stakeholder who has got a low interest on your project, to a large extent, is not that interested on the project, but has got a high power as far as the project is concerned. This type of stakeholder must be kept satisfied. The reason why you want to satisfy this stakeholder is because of the high power that is withheld by this stakeholder. You want to ensure that in respect to any concerns of this particular stakeholder, you take it with high priority, especially yourself working as a business analyst. You are looking at what is the power of this stakeholder even within the organization. If I can understand the power of this particular stakeholder and having done my analysis, I discovered that the stakeholder does not really have an interest on the project, but has got a high power within the organization, then I want to ensure that I keep the stakeholder satisfied. Talking about the second category, which is a low interest and a low power. Now, we've got some stakeholders who could have low interest on the project as well as low power in respect to the power within the organization. This type of stakeholder must be monitored accordingly. Why are you monitoring this type of stakeholder? The reason why you are monitoring this type of stakeholder is keeping an eye on them is because to a large extent, changes are constant within the organization. And before you know it, there could be one changes or another. And this stakeholder with low power today can, of course, to a large extent, become a stakeholder with high power tomorrow. So you want to ensure that you monitor this sort of stakeholder in order to manage them properly. When I say manage, what do I mean? Let's take, for example, this stakeholder, there has been some changes, and this stakeholder from low power has now become a stakeholder with high power. You want to ensure that you understand the interest of that particular stakeholder in respect to the changes that had happened in the organization. So these are more reasons why you need to ensure that a stakeholder with low interest and low power are monitored. Talking about stakeholders with high interest and high power. This sort of stakeholder have an high interest on the project, as well as within the organization, they've got high power. You want to ensure that these sort of stakeholders are being managed closely. You ensure that you provide every information that is required to this stakeholder at the appropriate time. Do you engage in agile methodology? You want to ensure that this sort of stakeholder are carried along during review, even during validation of requirements. You want to ensure that this stakeholder with a high interest and high power are part of those who give some form of authorization and validation to the requirement that has been gathered, and as well as you bring them into sprint review session in order to ensure that they are well informed and well updated in respect to the status of the project. And we've got this last category of stakeholders, which are stakeholders with high interest and low power. This stakeholder has got a high interest on the project, but has got a low power. Now, due to the low power of this stakeholder, there is little to how this stakeholder could affect the project, but this sort of stakeholder are needed to be kept informed. You want to keep them informed on any status in respect to what is happening within this project. Now, what are we trying to understand here? We are looking at stakeholder identification. Not only is it important for you to identify a stakeholder, now I've given us a column that you can leverage in order to easily identify your stakeholder and categorize the stakeholder in respect to the metrics, which are elements gotten from the definition. And you'll remember, speaking about the elements, I spoke about power and interest. And that is what brought us to this particular slide, where we have these 4 various categories that a stakeholder could fall into. And we said a stakeholder with low interest, high power should be kept satisfied. Low interest and low power stakeholders should be monitored closely. High interest and high power stakeholder should be managed closely, and high interest and low power stakeholder should be kept informed. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sure by now you know what stakeholder identification is all about. I'm sure by now you can also identify and analyze your stakeholder properly. Don't forget 2 important elements when we are analyzing a stakeholder: the power and the interest of the stakeholder. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, as well as share your comments, as I will be in the comment section to respond swiftly to every of your questions. Thank you guys. Bye.